Australia has lost its way, hasn't it? We're intent on self-destruction. We're undercutting our own values and strengths from within. That's what was on display yesterday on the Sickening Harbour Bridge. Some people dressed in Arabian scarves, some covering their faces with those scarves terrorist style, some waving the flags of terrorist outfits like Hamas and Hezbollah, and even parading a poster of the supreme leader of Iran, the religious extremist whose regime funds terrorists, including Hamas and Hezbollah, and who was committed to the destruction of Israel. Just sickening. They called it, with a truly Orwellian twist, a march for humanity, when in fact it was a march for inhumanity, effectively pleading for the Islamist extremist terrorists of Hamas to be left in charge of Gaza. But listen to how the Prime Minister described the protest.
Yesterday's march was peaceful and was an opportunity for people to express their concern about what is happening in Gaza.
Peaceful? Peaceful protests sing Kumbaya, Prime Minister. Listen to what this one was singing. Yeah, death, death to the IDF. Death to the young Israeli men and women who are defending their fellow citizens, Jewish and Muslim alike, from Hamas, from Hezbollah, from Islamic Jihad, from the Houthis and from Iran. Fancy wishing death upon the IDF, the defence forces that all young Israelis serve with as a part of their duty to protect their nation. The same IDF who lost dozens of men and women on October the 7th and has lost dozens more since. And I don't suppose we should be surprised at the Prime Minister's support, though, for this protest, because back in the day, he was part of the same anti-Israel mob.
The response of Israel has been to meet children throwing rocks with helicopter gunships, with tanks and with missiles.
Yeah, the leopard doesn't change his spots. Now, some of you might think I'm overstating how repugnant this protest was at its core. You'll think there were many people there with genuinely good intentions. Sure, but I've shown you before how the lead organiser is a self-described socialist revolutionary. This is just his latest attack against his own country. But if you really want to get into some insight into this protest and its motivations, then you should have a listen to this local leader of a Sydney Muslim community.
We have here Sheikh Ibrahim Dadoun. How are you finding it?
MashaAllah, it's absolutely packed. Numbers look left, right, centre. There's all people coming from all around Australia to support our brothers and sisters in Palestine. This is very heartwarming.
Tell me about the crowd.
The crowd's incredible. They've got a lot of energy. Everyone here wants to see the end of starvation. They want to see the end of the Zionist entity committing their atrocities and their war crime. We stand on the Harbour Bridge on an iconic day when we are protesting, we're marching for humanity.
Yeah, Sheikh Ibrahim Dadoun, railing against the Zionist state, he says, and marching for humanity. Does he look and sound a little familiar to you? Well, that's because you've seen him before, about 22 months ago now, the day after the October the 7th atrocities, when he was joyously celebrating the murder, rape, torture and abduction of about 1,500 men, women and children in southern Israel.
The day of pride! The day of victory! This is the day we've been waiting for!
Wow, there he was. And we had political leaders, journalists and so-called human rights activists marching along with this bloke, marching for humanity yesterday. Please. See what I mean about subverting our nation, undercutting our values? The protest yesterday was typical of the anti-Israel protests we've seen for almost 2 years now, we see the demonisation of Israel, and it just fuels ugly and violent anti-Semitism. Terrorist flags, posters of terrorist leaders, the chanting of slogans for the destruction of Israel. What sickening stuff. Do you remember a decade or so ago when the left went feral at Tony Abbott because someone waved a "Ditch the Witch" poster behind him? Well, have a look at this. At the march yesterday, we saw at least one poster of the Ayatollah Khomeini, the Islamist extremist leader of Iran, who funds terrorism around the world, imprisons women for not wearing a veil, and constantly calls for the elimination of Israel. And there in front of that poster are former Labor Foreign Minister Bob Carr, the Sydney Lord Mayor Clover Moore, and former Labor Minister, now backbencher, Ed Husic. Yet Husic thinks we need to all overlook the extremist elements on display yesterday.
Clearly, people will pick out some things that were objectionable to other people, and I completely understand that. That's democracy. But I just think I would hate for it to detract from the images of that aerial view of the Harbour Bridge with so many people on it that just want the hostilities to end, and particularly the impact on kids.
Yeah, forget about the messages, just go with the pictures, hey? Really, some people might object to terrorism and the destruction of Israel, but let's focus on how we really care about the kids. Why then was there not one poster calling for the release of the hostages? Why didn't we see posters of kids like these kids? Shiri Bibas and her two little boys, Kafir and Ariel, abducted by Hamas on October the 7th, held in Gaza, killed in Gaza, and then handed back as dead bodies in a grotesque ceremony put on by Hamas. The monsters who started this war keep prolonging it and to this day reject a ceasefire. Why don't any of these protesters talk about the kids who were deliberately murdered and taken hostage? Let's be clear, the protest march yesterday was demanding that Israel stops fighting Hamas, that it leaves Hamas in charge, the same terrorist group that still holds 50 hostages, 30 of them dead, just dead bodies they keep as bargaining chips, and 20 others alive or just barely clinging to life, like 24-year-old Eviatar David, taken from the Nova Music Festival on October the 7th, 667 days ago. Now, let me warn you, this is horrible to watch. The video was released by Hamas and his family approves of it being shown, saying that the abuse of Eviatar for propaganda purposes violates even the lowest standards of humanitarian law and basic human decency.
אין לי מושג אם יהיה אוכל. אין לי שמץ של מושג מה יקרה עם זה. אני כבר לא אוכל, לא יודע כמה ימים ברצף. אני אוכל ממש 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 מעט. אתם יכולים לראות כמה אני רזה.
Incredibly, while thousands marched across the Sickening Harbour Bridge citing false claims about deliberate starvation and the targeting of civilians in Gaza, no one was marching for the hostages. Hostages who face undeniable starvation in clear-cut war crimes repeated every day for almost 2 years now. Here's more of that distressing video.
מה שאני עושה עכשיו, אני חופר את הקבר. הקבר שמיד מבחינתי לי. כי כל יום שעובר הגוף שלי הולך, נחלש, נהיה רזה יותר וחלש יותר. מבחינתי זה נראה שאני בדרך למוות שלי. חופר לעצמי את הקבר שבו אני אולי אשכב.
This is such a repugnant contrast. The political posturing against Israel that involves a constant effort to ignore what Hamas has done, what it continues to do, and what it will keep doing if, as the protesters demand, Hamas is left in control.
I think that footage that you've just shown is really important for people to see. Hamas does, I've said from day one, a number of things. Hamas obviously has to be held to account. the hostages must be released. And the other thing that's important for us all is to recognise humanity from all sides. Israelis who suffered deeply, brutally, were brutally traumatised, wrongly treated by Hamas on the day of October 7, which I've regularly spoken up with. Their families should have welcomed home every single person that went about their business on October 7, shouldn't be treated that way. And those hostages absolutely should be released. And whoever's treated people like that have to be held to account, one. Similarly, innocent Palestinians, mums, dads, their kids in particular, Laura, should not be treated in the way that they've been treated.
This really is tortured logic, a terrible false equivalence. Hamas and its supporters didn't just wrongly treat people, they shot them dead, decapitated them, burned them alive, raped them, tortured them and took them hostage. And to the extent that the people of Gaza are facing terrible trauma now, as they undeniably are, it's all because of Hamas. The war could stop tomorrow if Hamas handed back the hostages and surrendered. In fact, Hamas has just rejected another ceasefire offer. Why was yesterday's march not directed against Hamas instead of Israel? Why is the outrage not directed at the agents of chaos rather than those who are trying to overcome this death cult? For the march organisers, this was a public relations masterstroke, creating the impression around the world that Australians are turning on Israel.
Our correspondent Nicole Johnson has the latest from Sydney.
Thousands of Australians across the country are holding pro-Palestinian demonstrations in Melbourne, Adelaide and here in Sydney on the city's iconic Harbour Bridge. But even though the weather is terrible, thousands of people have turned out for it.
Crowds marched across Sydney Harbour Bridge, which was closed for about 5 hours. Organisers are demanding all humanitarian aid be immediately allowed into Gaza and for the Israeli military to withdraw from the Strip.
The rally's now come to an end. The bridge is still closed, but certainly a huge number of people braved the rain, came out in the rain. It's been bucketing all day here in Sydney to attend this rally.
And have a look at the local taxpayer-funded media, the ABC. Not only has the ABC repeatedly misled the public with false claims that Israel bombed the Al Ali hospital, false claims it targeted aid workers and the deceptive images proffered last week as proof of starvation. Its reporter yesterday sounded like he was making the protesters' arguments rather than just reporting on their march.
Their message is the loudest it's ever been. They are deeply concerned about the level of human suffering taking place in Gaza. They want it to stop, and they're calling on the Australian government to act now.
Yeah, let them speak, mate. You're not there to make their arguments. We're in a bad place, aren't we? The facts don't seem to matter. Only the anti-Israel narrative matters. And to be fair, there will have been well-intentioned people at the march yesterday. If they only watch the ABC or read The Guardian, they might actually believe that Israel is starving people or targeting civilians or prolonging the war. This is where the misinformation and tendentious reporting is so dangerous. And this is where the politicians and the media have a heavy responsibility that too many of them ignore. And this is where citizens need to accept their responsibility to inform themselves. Because while there's plenty of anti-Israel propaganda out there, Hamas propaganda, the facts are available too. People should just spend a bit of time informing themselves, lest they end up marching across a bridge and being useful idiots for the bloodthirsty Islamist extremist terrorists of Hamas. Carry a yellow flag for the hostages instead of a Hamas or Hezbollah flag, and then you'd be marching for humanity. Display a photo of hostages, alive or dead, instead of the most dangerous Islamist extremist leader in the world, and then you'd be marching for humanity. Instead, Australia showed that it's imported the enmities and anti-Israel biases of the Middle East. There were many Palestinian flags flown, there were Aboriginal flags, there were the green flags of Islam and the red flags of socialism. But I couldn't spot any Australian flags, except for the one they burned in the matching protest held in Melbourne, which also had a lovely touch of graffiti calling for the abolition of Australia. Yeah, these actions tell you a lot about the problems we have and also just how far these protests have strayed from mainstream values. They do damage, though, and not only to our social cohesion. They also give encouragement to terrorists. The reaction from Hamas to protests like this around the world has been to extend the war, to break off ceasefire talks and hang on to its hostages. The protests are styled as anti-war, but they actually only prolong the conflict. The way to end the war is to maximise pressure on Hamas. People need to focus less on telling lies about Israel and more on telling the truth about Hamas.